"Do it now," the Apache woman pleaded. The cowboy did it, and then the law came and burned him. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the rugged cliffs of the American Southwest, casting long shadows across the dusty land. The wind carried the dry, earthy scent of the desert, and the occasional cry of a distant hawk echoed over the valleys. Naeli, a young Apache woman, moved cautiously along the riverbank, her bare feet stirring small clouds of sand with each step. Her hands were full of woven baskets, carefully balanced as she gathered water for her family and community. Every drop was precious, and she moved with a quiet urgency, knowing the desert offered little room for mistakes. The river, a narrow ribbon of life cutting through the harsh land, shimmered under the fading sunlight. Naeli paused for a moment to rest, her dark eyes scanning the horizon. She had grown up in these lands, learning the ways of the earth from her elders. She knew every plant, every hidden path, and every trick the desert could play. But even with all her knowledge, a deep unease had settled in her chest. Lately she had heard whispers, rumors of settlers moving deeper into their territory, taking land, livestock, and sometimes even people. Her heart tightened at the thought. Naeli's family had always been careful. They had lived in harmony with the land, respecting the rivers, the animals, and the mountains. But the newcomers brought disruption wherever they went. Just yesterday, she had seen one of the settlers riding boldly across sacred ground, shouting carelessly at the children playing nearby. Naeli's father had warned her the settlers were not to be trusted, and one wrong step could bring danger not just to her, but to everyone in the camp. As she continued along the river, Naeli's senses sharpened. She had learned long ago that silence could be deceiving. Breath. Every rustle of grass, every snapping twig could signal danger. Her hands tightened around the baskets, and her ears strained for sounds out of place. Then she saw him. Jesse, the cowboy whose name had become a whisper of fear in their camp. He was leaning casually against a gnarled mesquite tree, a confident smirk on his face. His boots dug slightly into the sand as he shifted weight, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, swept across the riverbank. Jesse had been causing trouble for months. Livestock had gone missing, and people had disappeared for short periods, only to return shaken and silent. He was known for acting without regard for anyone else, and the elders had warned the community to avoid him whenever possible. But today, Naeli's heart sank as she realized he had noticed her. His smirk widened, and he began to walk toward her, his boots crunching against the sand. There was no kindness in his step, only a careless arrogance that made Naeli's stomach churn. Her mind raced. Naeli knew she had to act quickly, but she also knew she could not show fear. Fear would give him power over her. She steadied her voice, firm yet calm, and called out to him before he could come too close. "Stop, Jesse! You have no right here." Her words were a warning, but also a plea. She hoped he would understand that any more mischief could bring serious consequences. Jesse laughed, a sound that grated against Naeli's nerves.
"And who's going to stop me?"
"You?" he said, his tone mocking. "Don't worry, little bird." Psst. "I'm just passing through," he continued, walking, slow and deliberate, making sure she noticed his confidence. Naeli's hands clenched the baskets tighter. She remembered the stories her mother had told her, stories of Apache women who had stood firm against invaders, who had protected their families with courage and wisdom. Naeli knew she had to be that person now. The river sparkled as the last rays of sunlight danced across its surface, reflecting Naeli's worried face. She took a deep breath, drawing strength from the land around her. Every plant, every stone, every bend in the river had taught her resilience. She would not let Jesse's threats intimidate her. But she also knew she could not face him alone. The community had always been her support, and their safety depended on her next move. Nayeli decided to keep a close distance but not provoke him further. She began to slowly follow Jesse, making sure to stay hidden behind bushes and rocks. Her eyes never left him. She needed to know what he was planning, and she needed to protect anyone who might be in his path. The desert was quiet, almost too quiet, and the tension in the air was heavy. Nayeli felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but she also felt a strange clarity. This was a moment where courage mattered more than fear. As the sun dipped below the cliffs, casting the world in shades of red and gold, Nayeli watched Jesse approach a small herd of horses grazing near the river. Her heart thumped in her chest. She knew that if he touched the animals, it would spark a conflict that could ripple through the community. But she took a cautious step forward, hoping to intercept him. "Do it now," she whispered, not as a command, but as a desperate plea for him to stop before things got out of control. Jesse paused, turning his head slightly, but did not slow his pace. The smirk remained on his face, and Nayeli realized that reasoning alone would not deter him. Her mind raced, considering every option. Retreat and alert the others. Confront him directly and risk angering him further? Nayeli's instinct told her that she needed to be clever. She began planning her next moves, knowing that one wrong step could endanger everyone she loved. The desert around them grew colder as night approached. Shadows stretched across the land, creating shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. Nayeli used the darkness to her advantage, keeping low and moving with the shadows. Her heart was steady now, her fear replaced by determination. She had always known that life in these lands required courage and quick thinking. Tonight would be no different. Hours passed, and Jesse finally moved away from the riverbank, his plans unknown. Nayeli returned to her family's camp under the cover of night, her mind buzzing with worry and strategy.
She shared what she had seen with the elders, and together they began planning how to protect their people and their land.
Nayeli felt the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of purpose. She knew that the coming days would be dangerous, but she also knew that courage, wisdom, and unity could face even the greatest threats. That night, as the stars shone brightly over the desert, Nayeli sat by the fire, listening to the quiet crackle of the flames. She thought about the river, the cliffs, and the wide open sky, the land that had shaped her and that she loved deeply. She promised herself that she would stand strong, that she would act wisely, and that she would protect her people no matter what came. The encounter with Jesse had been a warning, a spark that ignited her determination. Nayeli knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that bravery and resolve would guide her through the darkness. By the time the camp settled into quiet sleep, Nayeli remained awake, her eyes on the horizon. The desert was vast and danger lurked in every shadow, but she felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited, ready to defend her family and her community, and ready to ensure that justice would be more than just a whisper on the wind. But tonight, she was not just a young woman. She was a guardian, a witness, and a force of courage, ready for the trials that the desert would bring. The next morning, the desert was quiet, almost eerily so, as the sun rose over the horizon. Its first light turned the dusty plains to gold, and the cliffs glowed like fire. Nayeli awoke early, her body stiff from the previous day's walk along the river, but her mind was alert and focused. Breath. She remembered every detail of her encounter with Jesse, every movement he had made, and every shadow that had passed across his face. Something about him unsettled her. His calm, confident stride, his careless disregard for anyone but himself. Nayeli knew that this was more than just a nuisance. It was a threat that could grow into something much worse.
She gathered her baskets again and set out toward the community's small gardens and pens where livestock grazed peacefully.
Along the way, she noticed signs of disruption. hoofprints leading away from the pens, broken branches, and scattered footprints that had not been there the night before.
Nayeli's heart sank.
It seemed Jessie had already been active while the community slept. Her mind raced. How much had been lost? How much damage had been done? She pushed down the fear, focusing instead on action. There was no time to dwell on worry. She needed to assess the situation carefully and decide what to do next.
The elders gathered in the central area of the camp as Nayeli approached. Their faces were lined with concern, and their eyes betrayed worry about the safety of the people.
Nayeli recounted everything she had seen. The river encounter, Jessie's confident demeanor, and the suspicious activity near the pens. The elders listened silently, nodding occasionally, weighing her words. Finally, the oldest among them, a woman with silver hair and a voice that carried authority, spoke. "We cannot ignore this," she said. "He has shown that he does not respect us, our land, or our people. We must prepare, but we must be wise. We cannot act recklessly." Nayeli nodded, understanding the wisdom behind the elders' words. Courage alone would not be enough to protect the community. They needed a plan, and they needed to move carefully. She began helping organize the people, dividing them into groups to watch over different areas of the camp and surrounding lands. Scouts would be sent to track any suspicious activity, and the community would remain vigilant. Nayeli felt a sense of purpose. She was no longer just an observer. She was a leader, a protector, someone whose choices could influence the safety of everyone she cared about. Meanwhile, Jessie had not remained idle. He had moved deeper into the territory, scouting and taking advantage of the open spaces. He was reckless but clever, trying to avoid detection while pursuing his own interests. From a distance, he watched the Apache camp, noting movements and sounds, unaware that Nayeli had already begun monitoring him. But she had learned to read the desert like a book, to notice footprints, broken branches, and disturbances in the sand. Every detail mattered, and she took notes in her mind, preparing for the moment when she would confront the threat more directly. As the day progressed, the tension in the camp grew. Children played quietly, aware that something was different in the air. Adults moved with alertness, glancing at every shadow and listening intently to the smallest sounds. Nayeli walked among them, offering reassurance and guidance, her presence calming their nerves. She knew that fear could spread quickly, and that keeping the community focused and united was just as important as watching the land for threats.
By mid-afternoon, the scouts returned with troubling news.
They had followed Jessie's tracks and found evidence of stolen livestock and signs of his camp further along the ridge. Nayeli listened carefully, noting every detail. The elders debated their next steps, weighing the risks of confronting him directly against the dangers of letting him continue unchecked. Nayeli spoke up, her voice steady and confident despite the tension. "We cannot let him continue. If we wait, more will be lost. But we must be careful. We can track him, gather evidence, and let the law intervene. We do not need to face him alone, but we must act before it is too late." They had always respected her for her wisdom, her calm in moments of uncertainty, and her ability to see clearly even under pressure. The elders agreed, and a plan began to form. Nayeli would lead a small group to follow Jessie, keeping to the shadows and observing his actions. Meanwhile, the rest of the community would remain prepared to protect themselves if necessary. The balance of caution and courage was delicate, but Nayeli understood it well. As the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the desert in shades of red and orange, Nayeli and her group set out. They moved quietly, stepping carefully over rocks and sand, avoiding dry branches that could snap underfoot. The wind carried their scents away, and they relied on their knowledge of the land to stay hidden. Nayeli's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, watching for movement or signs of the cowboys' presence.
Every detail mattered, the slight change in the sand, the distant sound of hooves, the smell of smoke from a distant fire.
Hours passed, and they finally reached a small clearing where Jesse had been spotted earlier. The group crouched behind a ridge, watching him from a distance. He was not alone. A few other cowboys had joined him, though they seemed unaware of the nearby observers. Jesse's confidence was evident, and Nayeli's heart pounded as she realized the danger they were in. One wrong move could reveal their presence, and the consequences could be severe. But she held her ground, reminding herself that careful observation was their advantage. They watched as Jesse interacted with the other men, speaking loudly and laughing carelessly. Nayeli took note of his movements, the way he handled the livestock, and the manner in which he disregarded the land and the rules of decency. She recorded every detail mentally, knowing that it would be important when they reported back to the elders and later to the law. Her mind also wandered briefly to her family, to the children playing quietly in the camp, and she felt a renewed determination to protect them. As darkness began to fall, the group retreated carefully back toward the camp space, sticking to shadows and hidden paths. The journey was slow and tense, but they managed to return without being seen. When they arrived, Nayeli and the scouts shared their findings with the elders. Maps were drawn in the sand, tracks were described in detail, and a plan was formed to alert the authorities. Nayeli felt a sense of relief mixed with apprehension. The first step toward justice had been taken, but she knew the hardest part was still ahead. That night, the community gathered around the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the faces of those who had worked tirelessly to protect their people. Nayeli spoke to the group, encouraging them to remain vigilant, to stay united, and to trust in their strength and wisdom. Her words carried hope and reassurance, reminding everyone that fear could be overcome with courage and careful planning. As the stars filled the sky, Nayeli looked toward the distant cliffs where Jesse had been seen. The desert was quiet again, but she knew that peace was temporary. The cowboy was dangerous, unpredictable, and bold. But she also knew that with careful observation, patience, and unity, they could prevent further harm. The events of the day had strengthened her resolve. Nayeli was no longer just a witness. She was an active protector, ready to face the challenges ahead with courage and intelligence. Desperate beloved brother shot out to the Descanard and rose in a heart full of plans and a heart full of determination. The desert had tested her before, and it would test her again, but Nayeli was ready. She would not allow fear to dominate her actions, nor would she let injustice prevail. The next steps were critical, and she promised herself that she would continue to act wisely, courageously, and decisively. The morning would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new dangers, but Nayeli was prepared. She had seen the threat, understood its magnitude, and taken the first steps toward confronting it. Her community was watching, relying on her, and she would not let them down. The story of the day, the observation of Jesse, and the careful planning that followed had become the foundation of what would soon unfold. A confrontation that would test courage, justice, and the strength of a united community in the harsh, beautiful desert. The morning arrived with a pale, quiet light, painting the desert in soft shades of beige and gold. Nayeli awoke before the sun fully appeared, her thoughts heavy with the events of the previous day. She knew that Jesse would not stop easily. The cowboy had a reputation for boldness, and his careless confidence made him unpredictable. Nayeli could not rely on luck or hope. She needed careful planning, vigilance, and courage. Today, she would act not just as a protector, but as the eyes and ears of her community, ensuring that no harm came to her people. As she moved through the camp, Nayeli noticed the tension among the villagers. Families whispered quietly, glancing at each other nervously. The elders held meetings under the shade of large desert trees discussing strategies, while children moved carefully, sensing the unease but not fully understanding its cause. Nayeli approached the elders and shared her plan for the day. She suggested that a small, skilled group follow Jesse, gather evidence of his actions, and report back. This would allow them to involve the authorities without putting the entire community at risk. The elders listened carefully, nodding in agreement. Naeli's calm and precise thinking had earned their trust. By mid-morning, Naeli led her small group across the dusty plains. They moved with caution, sticking close to the rocks and hidden paths, their eyes scanning every inch of the ground for tracks, footprints, or signs of Jesse's movement. The desert, which seemed so empty to outsiders, was full of clues. Every broken branch, every disturbed patch of sand told a story. Naeli's ability to read the land was unmatched, and her companions followed her lead, careful to stay silent and alert. After several hours of tracking, they finally spotted Jesse from a distance. He had stopped near a narrow canyon, where he seemed to be examining the terrain. He was alone, but his movements were sharp and deliberate, showing his awareness of the world around him. Naeli crouched behind a rocky outcrop, whispering instructions to her companions. Breaths. Stay low. Do not make a sound. Watch what he does.
We only need to observe, not confront, for now.
Breaths. The group watched as Jesse approached a small herd of horses grazing near the canyon. He moved with a casual arrogance, swinging a rope in his hand as if he had every right to take what he wanted. Naeli's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew that if Jesse noticed them, the consequences could be dangerous. Yet the anger in her chest burned like fire. She wanted to step forward, to confront him directly, but she knew that patience and careful observation were their allies. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the desert into a shimmering heat wave. Naeli and her companions continued to watch Jesse, documenting every action he took. He was reckless, but not careless, moving in patterns that suggested he was experienced in avoiding detection. Naeli made mental notes of his behavior, imagining how she could describe it to the elders and, eventually, to the law. She also considered the safety of her community. Breath.
Every stolen animal, every trespass was a threat to their survival. Naeli's sense of responsibility weighed heavily on her, but it also strengthened her resolve.
By late afternoon, Jesse finally moved away from the canyon, heading toward a distant ridge. Naeli led her group in a careful pursuit, making sure to stay hidden while keeping him in sight. The terrain grew rougher, with sharp rocks and loose sand making each step precarious. Naeli felt a small sting of fear, but she pushed it aside. Courage, she reminded herself, was not the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. Her companions followed her example, their trust in her guidance unwavering. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Naeli saw Jesse stop near a cluster of mesquite trees. He seemed to be taking stock of the area, pausing to look at the horizon as if considering his next move. Ray. Naeli crouched low, whispering to her companions, "This is our chance to gather everything we need. Watch carefully." Remember every detail. They all nodded, understanding the importance of what they were witnessing. Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness of the desert, a snapping branch from a nearby path. Jesse froze, his hand instinctively moving to the rope at his side. Naeli held her breath, hoping that the sound had come from the wind or an animal. But Jesse's gaze swept the area with suspicion, and Naeli realized how close they had come to being discovered. Brash. She signaled to her companions to move back slowly, keeping low and avoiding any sudden movement. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible, as they silently retreated. Back in the safety of the rocks, Naeli allowed herself a brief moment to catch her breath. Her heart was racing, but she also felt a surge of pride. They had observed Jesse's actions without being detected, and they now had enough evidence to show the elders and the authorities what he was doing. Breaths. Nayeli's mind already began planning the next steps, how to report the crimes, how to ensure the community was protected, and how to prepare for any retaliation. By nightfall, Nayeli and her group returned to the camp, tired but determined. Rest. They shared their observations with the elders in detail, describing every movement, every stolen animal, and every reckless act of the cowboy. The elders listened carefully, nodding and asking questions to clarify details. With this information, they could now present a strong case to the law while also preparing their community for any further attempts by Jesse to disrupt their lives. That evening, as the camp settled around the fire, Nayeli took a moment to reflect. The desert stretched endlessly around them, quiet and still, yet filled with hidden dangers. She thought about the courage it had taken to follow Jesse, to remain unseen, and to act wisely under pressure. But Nayeli realized that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about understanding it, preparing for it, and protecting others in the process. She felt a deep connection to the land and to her community, knowing that her actions mattered. The night was calm, but Nayeli remained vigilant. She walked along the edge of the camp, listening to the quiet rustle of the desert and watching for any signs of movement. Her mind replayed the day's events, analyzing Jesse's patterns, considering what they had learned, and thinking ahead to the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that confrontation might be inevitable, but she also knew that careful observation, preparation, and unity would give them the best chance of success. As the stars twinkled in the clear desert sky, Nayeli finally allowed herself a moment of rest. Brave, she lay on the cool sand, staring up at the endless expanse above, and let her thoughts wander. She thought of her family, her community, and the responsibility she carried. She also thought of Jesse, reckless and arrogant, unaware that his every action was being watched and recorded. Nayeli felt a mix of anxiety and determination, knowing that the next few days would be crucial. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by dreams of the desert and the challenges ahead. Nayeli saw herself moving silently through the shadows, guiding her companions and standing firm in the face of danger. She felt the strength of her ancestors with her, a quiet power that gave her courage and clarity. When she awoke, the morning light would bring new decisions, new opportunities, and new risks.
But she was ready. Nayeli was no longer simply reacting to events. She was shaping them, taking control, and ensuring that justice and safety would prevail.
The next morning, Nayeli rose with a renewed sense of purpose. The desert was still, but she knew that Jesse would continue his reckless behavior if left unchecked. She prepared herself mentally, reviewing every lesson from the past days: patience, observation, strategy, and courage.
Today, she would act not only as a protector but as a guide, ensuring that her community could face the danger ahead with wisdom and unity.
Breath. Nayeli understood that every decision mattered. Every movement counted, and that the strength of the community depended on her leadership. With the rising sun casting golden light across the land, Nayeli led her group once more into the desert, their steps careful, deliberate, and full of purpose. They moved quietly, eyes sharp, ears tuned to the smallest sounds. The cowboys' actions had set the stage for conflict, but Nayeli was determined that it would end not in chaos, but in justice. Every shadow, every track, and every whisper of the wind could reveal the path forward. Nayeli was ready to face the challenges, to stand firm, and to ensure that courage, intelligence, and unity would guide them through the trials that awaited.
The morning air was cool and still as Nayeli and her small group set out once more.
The desert was bathed in soft golden light, the cliffs and rocks glowing warmly in the early sun. This day felt different to Nayeli. There was a tension in the air that went beyond the usual desert stillness, a sense that the events of the past days were leading to something inevitable. Jesse's reckless actions had escalated, and the community could no longer simply observe. Today, they would move decisively, but carefully. Nayeli's mind was sharp, every step planned, every glance intentional. The group moved silently, using every shadow and natural feature to their advantage. Naeli's eyes scanned constantly for any sign of Jesse. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility. She was aware that the cowboy was dangerous, and yet she also knew that courage and cleverness could prevail. As they crept along the ridge overlooking a small valley, she spotted him at last. Jesse was at work, attempting to round up a small herd of horses that had strayed from the Apache community's pens. The sight made Naeli's stomach tighten.
If he succeeded, it would be a significant loss for her people, and they could not allow it to happen. Naeli signaled for her companions to stay low and watch.
Every detail mattered. Jesse moved with confidence, speaking in a loud, mocking tone to two other men who had joined him. Desk. He seemed unaware that he was being observed, unaware that his actions had consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Naeli studied his every movement, noting how he handled the animals, how he interacted with the other men, and how he ignored the land and the rules that had been followed by generations before him. She committed each detail to memory, knowing that it would be crucial when the authorities intervened. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher, and Jesse's arrogance became more evident. He laughed loudly, seemingly confident that no one could challenge him. But Naeli noticed something important. His lack of caution was creating patterns. He was predictable in his recklessness. This observation gave her hope. She could anticipate his moves, and with the careful planning of her community and the eventual involvement of the law, justice could be achieved. By mid-afternoon, Naeli knew it was time to act. She could not confront Jesse directly. It was too risky. But she could set events in motion that would ensure his actions would no longer go unpunished. She led her group to a vantage point where they could remain hidden yet close enough to observe everything clearly. They positioned themselves near a small copse of trees, the branches offering cover from sight. From there, Naeli watched as Jesse prepared to move the herd further away, clearly thinking that no one was aware of him. Suddenly, one of Jesse's companions made a careless move, disturbing the sand and creating a faint noise. Jesse's head snapped toward the sound, eyes narrowing, and Naeli's breath caught in her throat. The moment of tension was almost unbearable, but Jesse relaxed after a few seconds, assuming it was nothing important. Naeli exhaled slowly, silently reminding herself and her companions that patience was key. Breaths. They had waited for the right moment, and that moment was near. As the afternoon light began to soften, Naeli made her decision. She had already communicated with the elders, who had alerted the local authorities. Jesse's reckless behavior could now be addressed through the law, and her observations would serve as crucial evidence. She remained hidden, keeping a careful watch over every movement, ensuring that no detail was missed. This was the culmination of days of observation, planning, and courage. Naeli felt a sense of resolve unlike anything she had experienced before. By late afternoon, Jesse had grown careless once again. He was far from the camp now, unaware that the law was on its way. Naeli and her group continued to document his actions, noting every detail with precision. They observed him rounding up the horses, shouting at them roughly, and moving in ways that showed a disregard for the rules and respect for the land. Naeli's heart ached at the thought of the disruption and harm, but she knew that her careful observation would lead to justice. As the sun began to dip behind the distant cliffs, a faint sound reached Naeli's ears, the distant hoofbeats and voices of lawmen approaching. Jesse finally looked up, his expression changing from arrogance to confusion. The authorities were here, and he had not expected it. Naeli signaled to her companions to remain hidden, watching as Jesse's bravado faltered. The cowboy who had seemed so untouchable now faced the reality of accountability. Naeli felt a surge of hope, mixed with relief, knowing that her careful planning and courage had made this moment possible. The lawmen rode into the valley, their presence commanding and decisive. Jesse tried to flee, but the authorities were ready. The events unfolded quickly. The lawmen surrounded him, their voices firm and clear, instructing him to surrender. Jesse's smirk was gone, replaced by the first signs of fear. Nayeli and her companions watched silently from their hidden vantage point, ensuring that no one else in the area was at risk. The confrontation was tense but controlled, and the authorities acted swiftly to prevent any harm to the community. Once Jesse was captured, Nayeli approached cautiously, making sure that her presence would not interfere with the proceedings. She observed as the lawmen began to document the evidence she and her group had collected. The stolen livestock, the tracks, and the patterns of his reckless behavior were all noted carefully. Nayeli felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice was finally within reach, and her community could begin to heal from the disruptions caused by Jesse's actions. That evening, back at the camp, the community gathered around the fire. The flames cast warm, flickering light over the faces of those who had worked tirelessly to protect their people. Nayeli spoke to the group, sharing the details of the day's events and the capture of Jesse. Her voice was calm but filled with strength.
"We have faced danger with courage, and we have acted with wisdom," she said.
Today we have ensured that justice will be served, but we must remain vigilant. Our community is strong, and our unity is our greatest strength. The people listened intently, their eyes reflecting relief and admiration. Children whispered quietly among themselves, sensing the importance of the day without fully understanding all the details. The elders nodded in approval, recognizing Nayeli's leadership and the careful strategy that had made this outcome possible. The camp was filled with a sense of cautious celebration, a recognition that their courage and preparation had prevented further harm. That night, Nayeli walked along the edge of the camp, her eyes scanning the desert under the bright, clear stars. She thought about the events that had led to this moment, the observations, the careful planning, the patience, and the courage. She realized that justice was not only about punishment, it was about protection, foresight, and the willingness to act wisely. Nayeli felt a deep connection to the land, her people, and the generations who had lived and thrived here before her. She knew that her actions had honored that legacy. Sleep came slowly, but when Nayeli finally rested, it was with a sense of accomplishment and renewed determination. She had faced a significant challenge, guided her community through a dangerous situation, and ensured that justice would prevail. The desert around them was quiet again, but Nayeli knew that vigilance would always be necessary. Challenges would come, but she also knew that courage, intelligence, and unity could overcome even the greatest obstacles. By morning, the community was calm. The immediate danger passed. Nayeli helped organize the return of the horses and the repair of any damage caused during Jesse's attempts to disrupt their lives. The lawmen documented everything carefully, relying on Nayeli's observations as critical evidence. The process was slow but steady, and Nayeli felt pride in her ability to lead her community through such a complex and tense situation. As the sun rose higher, Nayeli stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The desert stretched endlessly before her, vast and beautiful, a land both harsh and nurturing. She reflected on the courage it had taken to face this challenge, the wisdom it had required to plan carefully, and the importance of acting for the greater good. The events of the past days had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for whatever challenges might come next. Nayeli knew that the future was uncertain, but she also knew that the community, guided by courage and unity, would thrive. The morning after Jesse's capture dawned clear and calm. The desert was bathed in soft golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and earth across the plains. Nayeli rose before the sun, her mind still racing with the events of the past days. Although the immediate danger had passed, She knew that the consequences of what had happened would ripple through the community for weeks and months to come. She also understood that the lessons learned in these moments were as important as the victory itself. She walked quietly to the edge of the camp, watching the horizon where the cliffs met the sky. The land was vast, beautiful, and unyielding, just as it had always been. Nayeli reflected on her role in the events. The careful observation, the patience, the courage, and the leadership she had shown. She realized that she had grown in ways she had never imagined. Fear had been present, yes, but it had not controlled her. Instead, it had guided her awareness, sharpened her instincts, and strengthened her resolve. As the sun rose higher, she moved through the camp, checking on families and speaking quietly with the elders. Children ran past her, laughing and playing, the tension of the past days temporarily forgotten in their joyful energy. Adults greeted her with respect and gratitude, acknowledging the leadership she had shown and the courage she had displayed. Nayeli felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her actions had protected not only her family but the entire community. She understood that leadership was not about recognition or power. It was about responsibility, courage, and service.
The elders called a meeting in the central area of the camp.
Everyone gathered, sitting in the soft sand, their faces attentive and expectant. Nayeli recounted the events of the past days, from the first encounter with Jesse to the careful observation, the tracking, and finally, the capture by the law. She described every detail clearly, emphasizing the patience and unity that had made success possible. The community listened intently, nodding and murmuring their agreement, understanding the importance of each action taken. One of the elder women, her hair streaked with silver and her voice calm but firm, spoke after Nayeli finished.
What you have done, Nayeli, is more than courage.
You have shown wisdom, foresight, and a respect for life and justice. You have guided us through danger without bringing harm to anyone. That is a lesson for all of us. Nayeli felt a surge of pride, but also humility. The praise was not about her alone. It reflected the strength of the entire community, working together, following her guidance, and remaining vigilant. After the meeting, Nayeli and a small group began the work of restoring the community to its usual rhythm. The livestock was carefully returned to the pens, and any damage to the fences or gardens was repaired. Men and women worked side by side, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The air was filled with the soft sounds of hammering, tying knots, and careful conversation. Though the events had been stressful, the act of rebuilding brought a sense of calm and normalcy. Nayeli moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement, ensuring that the work was done efficiently and safely. In the late afternoon, Nayeli took a walk toward the river. The water sparkled under the warm sunlight, flowing steadily as it always had. She knelt by the edge, letting the cool water run over her hands, and reflected on the lessons of the past days. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger. It was about understanding it, planning for it, and protecting others. She thought of Jesse, of his arrogance and recklessness, and of the law finally holding him accountable. The experience had shown her that justice could be achieved, but only through careful action and unity. As she sat by the river, Nayeli thought about her family. She remembered her parents' guidance, her ancestors' teachings, and the stories of bravery and wisdom passed down through generations. She felt a deep connection to them and a sense of pride in carrying their legacy forward. The events of the past days had tested her in ways she could not have imagined, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in her ability to lead and protect. The evening brought a sense of celebration to the camp. A small fire was lit, and families gathered around, sharing stories, food, and laughter. Children ran freely, their previous fears forgotten in the warmth of the community. Nayeli observed quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment. The danger had passed, the community was safe, and the lessons learned would shape their future. She understood that courage, patience, and unity had been the keys to their success. As the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Nayeli found a quiet spot away from the fire. Rats. She looked up at the endless expanse above, the constellations twinkling brightly, and felt a sense of peace. The desert was vast and sometimes harsh, but it was also a place of beauty, life, and resilience. Nayeli realized that her journey had been about more than confronting one man. It had been about understanding the value of vigilance, the importance of justice, and the power of community.
She thought about the future.
The desert would continue to test them, as it always had, with challenges and unexpected events. But Nayeli knew that her people were strong, united and capable of facing whatever came. The lessons of courage, wisdom, and careful action would remain with them, guiding their decisions and strengthening their bonds. Nayeli felt confident that the community would thrive, protected by the vigilance and bravery of those willing to act with integrity. In the days that followed, Nayeli continued to work closely with the elders, ensuring that the community remained prepared and organized. They discussed ways to strengthen their defenses, care for the land, and protect their resources. Each decision was guided by the lessons of the past, emphasizing careful observation, cooperation, and foresight. Nayeli's role as a leader became more recognized, not through titles or rewards, but through the respect and trust of those around her. She also spent time teaching the younger members of the community, sharing her knowledge of the land, tracking, and vigilance. She emphasized that courage was not about fighting recklessly, but about understanding, planning, and protecting others. The children listened eagerly, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. Nayeli knew that the next generation would benefit from these lessons, carrying forward the strength, wisdom, and resilience that had been cultivated through her actions.
One morning, a messenger arrived from the local authorities.
Jesse's capture had been formalized, and the evidence Nayeli and her companions had collected played a critical role. The law had acted swiftly, ensuring that justice was served. Processo folded, satisfied that the system had finally worked in favor of fairness and protection. She felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that the threat that had loomed over her community was now fully addressed. Life gradually returned to its usual rhythm. The children played, the adults worked, and the community moved with a sense of harmony restored. Yet the memory of the past events remained vivid in Nayeli's mind. Breaths required, the careful planning, and the vigilance that had led to success. She understood that bravery was meaningful only when paired with wisdom, and that leadership was most effective when exercised for the protection and well-being of others. As the weeks passed, the story of Nayeli's courage spread quietly through nearby communities. People admired her ability to act decisively while keeping others safe, and her reputation as a wise and courageous leader grew. Nayeli remained humble, knowing that her actions were not about recognition, but about responsibility. She continued to guide her people, teach the younger generation, and ensure that the community remained strong and united. One evening, as the sun set and painted the desert in shades of red and gold, Nayeli sat with her family near the river. The water flowed peacefully, reflecting the sky above. She felt a deep sense of connection to her family, her community, and the land itself. The events of the past days had changed her, shaping her into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She realized that courage, vigilance, and unity were the true foundations of leadership, and that these values would guide her and her community for years to come. In the quiet of the night, Nayeli gazed at the stars, thinking of the challenges that had been faced, the dangers that had been avoided, and the lessons that had been learned. But she understood that life would continue to bring trials, but she also knew that the strength of the community, guided by wisdom and courage, could overcome any obstacle. The past days had been a test, and Nayeli had passed with grace, resilience, and clarity of purpose. The desert, vast and endless, seemed peaceful now. The threats had been confronted, The law had acted, and the community was safe. Nayeli felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her actions had made a lasting difference. She had faced danger with courage, acted wisely, and protected her people. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt a sense of peace, knowing that the lessons learned would endure, guiding her and her community for generations to come.